Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for the fourth episode in a series of 4 live streams around the theme of the Vegan Pike Conference, which is indeed happening now very shortly, September 28th to 29th, Kensington Town Halls. And those of you who are not up to speed with that, I'm sure you are. Many people are now. It's a conference of vegan animal rights, product-based campaigns, activism, grassroots campaigns, national campaigns, core vegan community, and quite a lot of attendees who are, getting into all of this. Some being around campaigning a long time. There's quite a big enthusiasm for this. It's really nice to see a real big focus on our activism. And exploring, not only some of the successes and showcasing some of the achievements of the current vegan animal rights plant-based collective, but also looking at some of the issues we are dealing with within the movement. There's always, social justice movements are going to be always full of disagreements. This is partly how we kind of move the conversations along. And indeed, tonight we will be looking at a big area of always interest to animal rights, vegan activists. That is the welfare paradigm. It's been well explored in previous years. Indeed, our first conference back in 2015 at Olympia did explore this in detail. We've come a long way since then. The movement, I think, has really grown up and evolved and developed, and have a lot more adult conversations around this theme. And certainly that will be the case this evening with my two guests, who I'm very happy to introduce. So first of all, just bring in Wendy McGovern. And Wendy is many things, but is also currently a co-host of the Animal Rights Show.
Hello, greetings team. Hello, nice to see you and everyone else on here as well. Can see some familiar faces in the, or names should I say, in the chat. So yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to hear your views. I know you're really articulate on this, and I'm one of these people that is really interested in listening and learning, because my views are kind of changing all the time in this area, in some respects, and foaming up in others. And our second guest is really interesting. I know he's got a lot to say about this. Is Ayrton Cooper, and Ayrton is from the Animal Justice Project. Ayrton, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, hi Tim. Thanks for having me on. Hi Wendy as well.
Hi Ayrton. Good to see you as well.
Yeah, you too.
Great, folks, and thank you anybody who's listening. Look, I will be keeping an eye on the comments probably about halfway through. So if you do want to ask any questions this time and ask any questions to the panelists, you can stick them in the comments and I will get to them later on during the conversation. Just to open this up though, look, first of all, I just want to talk about framing for this. So I'm sure many of us are already aware there's been some development in how we approach these conversations. The animal rights vegan movement is pretty small compared with big ag and big farm and big whatever else is just, using animals by the billion. And it's very important that although we have different views amongst our collective, that we have healthy disagreements, healthy debates, we have learning outcomes, and I particularly around this issue of welfare and abolition, which in previous years has seen, often quite messy and hostile debates going on that are, probably not the best way to take this forward. So this area, this time around, we're very much looking at this with a new framework where, understanding that there's many people with different views on this, and that nearly all of us have got the same intent. We're all seeking to see a day when we no longer use animals as commodities. I've taken several positions over the 7 years, and my views are always changing. So I'm really interested in this area. But, looking at this as more from an inside-outside game, where the small incremental steps, what we might refer to as welfare steps, industry regulation and such like going on. That's very much an inside game, very small steps from the inside, perhaps through parliament, laws, institutions, and such like. And then the outside game, which is very much more, campaign groups, pressure groups, really about sort of more clear demands, bigger steps, the ultimate goals, if you like, and the idea that with the inside game, the outside game, working together, we will achieve quicker our combined goals, which is to end these families. And referring to things like rights, simple rights for welfare reforms and fundamental rights or strong rights for abolitionist reforms and rights, is again a more useful way of framing it. And it's really just to help achieve learning outcomes. It's not to shy away from the issues or to cloud them or to pretend that there's some quite big differences. That's not the case. This is to frame it so that we've got a more inclusive discussion, and we're therefore more likely to seek learning outcomes and perhaps therefore hasten the shift beyond the welfare paradigm. And I know that all three of us on here are all firmly united in that, we want to see a move beyond the welfare paradigm. So Wendy, I'm just going to ask you first briefly to just come in with a few thoughts, particularly just following what I said and perhaps pinpoint some of the areas that we'll be talking about tonight.
Yeah, so I hear you when you're saying you're looking, especially at the conference, to get a more inclusive or I guess a more united way of dealing with this. And I suppose that's the trouble when we're looking at dichotomies, welfare versus abolition as one example. There's a lot of other dualities that are going on in the movement at the moment, which I think you spoke about briefly on your last live as well with David and Sasha and Alan, who got dropped off, I think. The whole intersectional versus animals only, all these dichotomies that come up in the movement. And I feel, I think it's useful to have labels, but only when they empower us. And so if they're creating division and animosity and we're making our movement smaller and smaller and having no effect whatsoever, it seems like we have to somehow find another way. And if all the infighting and I think social media has obviously exacerbated that in the way algorithms definitely like to polarize people and put us in little bubbles. I guess it's useful that we do come together and have maybe sometimes difficult conversations about these divisions and the differences, and how do we move forward as a movement? How do we, create effective change rather than just, spend all our time and energy arguing and fighting and calling each other horrible names and all this stuff. I hope that the conference will really have some real benefit to that, bring some real benefit to that. So one of the areas that I'm really interested in, and actually this ties in with the other panel that I'll be on. I'm on the two panels, one about the welfare paradigm, other called Language Matters, is actually the language that we use. And I think that might be worth exploring tonight with the three of us as well, and especially with Ayrton and your campaigns with Animal Justice Project. It'd be really useful maybe just to maybe explore some of the language that you're using in your campaigns, Ayrton, why you choose that language. And I'd like to maybe just give a few of my perspectives on how we use language around that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Thanks, Wendy. We can definitely have a conversation around language a little bit later on. And look, I know you're full of. I saw your talk at VARC, Vegan Animal Rights Conference back in April. You did a presentation, a really good presentation actually. I was really impressed by that. I think you managed that one really well because it was a contentious area for a number of reasons, but particularly with what else is going on at the conference. So, where's your take on this? You're someone who works for a national group. You've got a number of campaigns. Give us a little bit of where you think perhaps we should be focusing on. What's at the heart of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting topic to be talking about, isn't it? From the perspective of Animal Justice Project, and my own personal beliefs is, we should be coming in at the abolitionist stance. But as we know, we are such a small minority within the, not necessarily the animal rights community, but the whole, what's a better term, not the animal welfare community, but everyone who says they care about animals, in the UK, but also worldwide. And most people are coming at it from that welfare approach. Obviously, that's not what we do at our organisation, but these conversations definitely need to be had in terms of getting those people into our messaging as well, and actually having more people and more resources to make change happen faster. That's not saying that we're going to start going down the welfare approach, because we're not going to be doing that. But how we can come together, work together, and also bring them in line with our values. I think trying to get people who are pushing these welfare reforms, for example, if you're pushing for something in a legal way, if you're going to make legal changes, 99% of it is going to be through a welfare approach. You might be implementing some form of like welfare legislation that will eventually lead to the end of the industry. It's what they're doing over in Ireland at the minute, where they're looking into campaigning to ending pig farming. But what they're doing is the kind of incremental welfare legislation parts, where they're wanting to ban the mutilations and the farrowing crates, because they know that none of the pig farmers are going to be able to cope and make enough money if those changes are brought in. So it is an abolitionist approach in the long term. So yeah, I think it's super interesting to kind of see how we can bring those people in, hear their opinions, how they're doing it from the inside, and how we can use some of those tactics as well to still push that rights-based messaging, and still from an abolitionist approach as well.
Can I ask Ayrton a question? Tim, is that okay?
Yeah.
And Ayrton, for you as well, obviously, asking you the question. Ayrton, what would you see? I'm so used to being on the other side of the questions. It's quite funny. Going into my role, Ayrton, what would you see is fundamentally the difference between, say, as someone with an abolitionist, mindset? How do you see the difference between, say, how you would approach a campaign, and how, say, one of the maybe bigger national welfare organisations would approach it? What would you say are fundamentally your differences in the actual practicality of that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I guess it's somewhat difficult to maybe compare in terms of how we'd approach a campaign like for a specific issue. But I would say that bigger welfare organisations, for example, might be looking at improving standards on animal farms, or changing the breed of animal that's going to be exploited. That is something that you're never going to see with somebody who's coming with abolitionist messaging. So, for example, like the Better Chicken Commitment, that always just spring to mind. It was one of the examples I used when I did the presentation at VARC. Obviously, welfare groups are pushing the Better Chicken Commitment for companies and supermarkets and fast food restaurants and places to sign up to it. And the biggest change in that is that they're going to be swapping the breed of chicken that's going to be exploited. But obviously, the sad reality is that chicken is still going to be exploited and still going to be killed, and they'll probably get to live for a couple of weeks longer. Whereas from the abolitionist side of things, we want to show that even if that welfare reform takes place, it's still going to be really bad, and it certainly shouldn't be the end goal. So sticking with the chickens, we have already showed that RSPCA assured slower growing chickens, which are actually raised to higher standards than those under the Better Chicken Commitment. We've already shown that they have, horrifically short lives, and we showed that back in 2019. And now we're seeing a, resurgence of groups pushing the Better Chicken Commitment. Whereas we're trying to show that if that takes place, it's still going to be just as bad, and that by pushing that welfare reform, I think as well, it's important to note that from the public's perspective, is that if they see all of this campaigning take place, and they see the campaign win, if everybody signs up to the Better Chicken Commitment, they're going to see that as the end goal. And then those welfare groups are going to then, probably push for high welfare in a different way in the same industry. So they're probably going to be like, oh, well, you've just kind of, you've just won, but now you're asking for even more. Whereas I guess from an abolitionist approach, you would be, looking to end the industry entirely, which is obviously a huge, huge goal. But most of these industries, they're not going to end overnight, but they might be able to be pulled further towards that goal than if we're asking for these smaller incremental changes. Hopefully that answered your question, but I always like the Better Chicken Commitment as an example, even if I can't say it most of the time.
Right, thank you for answering that. I just wanted to clarify something on that as well. So do you feel that when the public, for example, are seeing your campaigns versus, say, the Better Chicken, do you think they understand where it's going? Or do you think they see it as a similar, oh, we're just trying to make things better for the chickens while we are continuing to use them? Do you think they see a difference, or do you think that they would see it as a similar thing? Have you had like feedback from public feedback and things like that of the impact of the campaigns?
So I think there's two different sides here. There's the social media side reaching people, and then there's the media side reaching people. So what we tend to do is all of our undercover investigations, touch wood, up to now, have made national media, including that chicken investigation that we did all those years ago. And we always work with the journalists. We always get our investigation findings in when naming the companies or the specific farms, the assurance labels. And then we will always have that messaging in that article that we must go vegan, and that is going to be our end goal. And the best way to help these animals is to go vegan, to stop buying animal products. High welfare doesn't really mean anything, and this is always good as well, going after welfare assurances like RSPCA Assured, because I think the public are beginning to realise that although they are the highest welfare pretty much on the market, apart from some organic labels, if we keep pushing these investigations, then they're going to hopefully realise that they are no better than the standard, red tractor assured farms, for example. And then on the social media side, we will always keep our messaging right-based. So, within our videos, within our captions, on graphics and website content, written literature, posters, etc., always keep it rights-based, so that hopefully the public will see that, one, what our message is, and two, what they need to do as well.
Mm.
So,
Tim, I can keep going with questions, but I think this is your jam. So I'm going to hand back over to you.
And have some questions. But I think it does ask the big question, which we probably want to try and answer before we go on to perhaps some solutions to the problem is, what is the problem? I think the problem with the welfare reforms, I accept that a lot of the interrogating actually is a lot more, useful than perhaps I thought. But perhaps, I've just seen a new campaign that's really asking for not a lot, but quite a big not a lot. So, it's focusing on well, I'm not going to give the game away, but I use another example of where, because that's a broken, but it's a campaign that, if you have a focus on maybe the, that calves being taken away from their mums to produce milk. And there may be a real focus on that and a demand for change. But in doing so, it kind of ignores the mothers producing the milk. So there's no demand for change for the mothers producing the milk, only a demand for change for the calves being taken away from the mothers, which is obviously really important, but it's not addressing the fundamental wrong. It's addressing a part of the wrong rather than getting to the core of the wrong. But I can certainly see value in that, chipping away at, how particularly the industry views animals and works with animals. But I think the the danger we probably feel is in something like a Better Chicken campaign, which is specifically campaigning to keep chickens in captivity. That's its goal, is to keep chickens in cages being exploited ruthlessly and mercilessly for ever and a day. That's what it seems to me. And the demand it makes on the people is that, well, if you're going to eat chickens, make sure you're paying attention to the better chicken, the higher welfare. And to add to that, but potentially too, when some of these investigations into the farms that reveal that these conditions are not being maintained, that also results in the public thinking, oh, well, you know, I better go and check the farm out myself. And so they gravitate to the higher welfare farm. Of their own kind of, you know, oh yeah, come and visit, have a look around type farm, so people can satisfy themselves rather than trust some red tractor. It's been assured. So it seems to me that the dangers of the welfare campaigns that we see as rights-based advocates are in different stages. But some of them, however much I look at them as an inside game or maybe simple rights and such, you know, I can't really support, because I see that they're actually holding back the development of veganism, and they're holding back the understanding of fundamental rights for animals. And so, although I'm not opposed to them necessarily, I want to see us move beyond them. But Wendy, what would you identify? Would you share that view that the issue with the welfare campaigns is that they're actually holding back veganism and establishment of fundamental rights for animals?
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, when, as animal rights advocates, however we want to describe ourselves, as vegans, what we really want is a change in our relationship with our fellow animals. We want to change the fundamental relationships that we have with them. And I think when we're looking at general welfare campaigns, that's not changing the relationship at all. It's not changing how we see them, how we view them, how we talk about them, how we interact with them. It's just talking about how can we just give them a bit more space, or a bit more of this, or a bit better that. And it doesn't change that relationship of, we see them as a commodity, as something, not someone. And that's where I think need to put a lot of our attention, is how do we advocate for a change of relationship, a change of status, a change of, you know, breaking down the hierarchy, the false dichotomy of animal versus human, where animal, of course, is right at the bottom of the pecking order. And pecking order, is that, Jeremy's here, is that species is pecking order? I think we can have maybe pecking order. But anyway, yeah, so I guess that's the thing, and maybe that's where we ought to look when we are having conversations, when we're creating campaigns, is this pushing towards a change of our relationship with our fellow animals, or is it keeping us in the same murky, you know, you're a commodity, you're here for me, you're here to be used, you know, I might give you a better life while we use you, but at the end of the day, people just want to use our fellow animals. And, you know, if they see it as a necessity in some way. And I guess some of these campaigns are holding back the animal rights message, the abolitionist message, the vegan message, because I think they encourage people to be more complacent about their behaviors, about their choices, because they can justify it more to themselves. They have less guilt and shame if they feel that one of our fellow animals has had a better life while they're here, and it makes them feel better about their own choices. So it helps with any cognitive dissonance that they may have when brought up on their choices. It will help to push them down, because it's giving them, you know, it's a justification for them that, oh, well, actually, you know, I do. It's the four ends. Is the nice. It's nice. It's necessary. It's natural. It's, oh, I forgot the fourth one. Someone will remind me in there. I know someone's going to remind me of that fourth end, but it's all the four ends that people would justify to keep up their behavior that violates others. And I think the welfare campaigns do perpetuate that in some ways. And I think research was done, Tim, we spoke about this on our last chat, that recent research shows that that is actually true. People will continue to consume our fellow animals and body parts and secretions if they feel they're from a higher welfare farm, factory, all of that stuff. And they will obviously not even consider veganism in that way. So yeah, I think there are times when it definitely holds back the vegan movement, for sure.
That's correct. You mentioned research. Interesting. That's going to be a question for Ayrton, because it was at Ayrton's talk that I learned about that research. But that is the basic synopsis of the problem. Is that it is holding back because we're keeping ourselves in this welfare paradigm. As long as we treat animals okay, it's all right to use these commodities. And the whole point of the vegan animal rights position is to move beyond that, where we no longer see animals as commodities, and therefore we need to focus on the fundamental wrongs and rights for animals rather than their welfare and regulation treatments and steps to address. And Ayrton, would you subscribe generally? We mentioned research. There is some. It's only a paper to say. We wouldn't want to over elaborate. It's one paper that's published this year, but it does point, doesn't it, that there's now some evidence based, pointing to yes. Clearly. Yeah, tell us a bit more about that, if you would.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting paper actually. But yeah, as you mentioned, I had that in my presentation at VARC as some of the most recent kind of evidence that came out, because that was only put in a journal earlier this year. I think a month or two before we was at VARC, so it was quite apt really. Yeah, it's by Brewers, if anybody wants to know. And it's so it's about if we're pushing this higher welfare labeled meat. That's what they were specifically looking at, for want of a better term, but that's the term they were using. If we are pushing these high welfare labeled meat, then if people are using that as a stepping stone towards veganism, what they were finding was as soon as people have made that step to be buying high welfare animal products, in the long term, they are less likely to go vegan. And what that has actually showed is by pushing high welfare animal products, it's going to hinder veganism and therefore animal rights in the long term. So it really does, show that pushing things like the better chicken commitment isn't going to help in the long term, and actually it might even hinder the work that we're doing to try and increase veganism and show people what animal rights actually is. Because I think it's important to point out as well that we need to educate the public at the most basic level in terms of just highlighting that exploiting animals is a form of oppression. Because I think a lot of people see that in terms of human rights issues. There's lots and lots of different human rights issues, and I think a lot of people see them as forms of oppression. But I don't think there's enough people out there that are linking that oppressive behavior to what we're doing to animals. And it all comes from the same place. If we're going to be oppressive to animals, we're going to be oppressive to humans. So I think we really need to start there. And I think that's where the language really helps. And that's what we really need to focus on. Not necessarily making direct comparisons between animal struggles and human struggles, because that, as we know, doesn't always help. But what we can say is that, it comes from the same source. It's from those oppressive behaviors. So we need to educate people on that, which is, I guess, where the whole intersectionality conversation comes into it as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Is the key. And Wendy, I'm just going to ask you about that. I just mentioned that I forgot what I was going to say. Hold on. So yeah, we given that we've got a problem there, that we recognise that we think welfare reforms are, they're the ones that are in reach. But yeah, what I was just going to mention is that, there are a lot of people who've been part of the welfare paradigm. Is that people have been doing welfare reforms for 200 years. As we know, the RSPCA is celebrating 200 years this year. And so it is deeply entrenched in this, and it's not surprising that, when people come into the movement, if they're not getting an animal rights education, they just don't really understand this. And so they kind of support the welfare reforms because they think, oh, yeah, that's a great thing to do for animals. They haven't really explored or challenged, that property status and that kind of animal rights thing. They haven't really countered it. And I think it is incumbent of the groups, I think the nationalists, to do more to help make that animal rights position, clearer to people, especially when they come into the movement. I don't think we should shy away from the ethics. The how to go vegan is as important as the why we should go vegan. And the ethics demonstrate that, in the long run, people tend to stay vegan. The ethical points, and there's less recidivism amongst ethical vegans than there are perhaps people who are, trying a plant-based diet for health or weight management, something like that. So given that we've got a bit of an issue there, that we would say that, and that's clear, I think that's now coming out in research. A lot of us have been saying that for a long time. It's becoming clear. Wendy, I would take it, first of all, I think there's two sets of education and language, but language is, I know, a real subject of yours. And there is a panel at Big Bike Conference, not only on the Moving Beyond the Welfare Paradigm, which we're going to be exploring on Saturday, with all three of us on the panel and another three people on the panel too. But then is it on Sunday? I'll have to look it up. Can't remember now. What day
it is?
What day
Sunday. It is Sunday.
Sunday afternoon. Yeah, I know that because you had to get the dog sitter for both days.
No, I'm trying to organise 2 days.
I should know that anyway, but I do know that. So Sunday we do have the language panel, and that again ties in very much with how this is actually useful for animal rights advocates, so people, campaigners, vegans, people who are interested in this. And perhaps some people have done a lot of thought about it, some people haven't really considered any of this before. But you would certainly point to language, isn't it, as a step towards, okay, how do we move beyond this 200 years of welfare paradigm? One of the things is to start using basic rights-based language you can put forward, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Tim. Can I just go back to one point that Ayrton made actually about the comparisons and not kind of comparing directly. I think sometimes it's true that direct like-for-like comparisons cannot always be helpful for it if we disempower both victims, because it's not a like-for-like situation. However, I do feel that sometimes it is useful when we're talking about, for me, we're talking about no one's body should ever be controlled or violated or oppressed or commodified by another. I think if we're trying to put across that message, and also the message that no body should ever be made to be more important or valuable than others, regardless of size or shape, color, sex, and of course species and all of that. So if we're trying to put that message across, sometimes it's useful to actually talk about human situations in order to make people understand that, because they're seeing another species as a completely different, inferior, otherizing, they're just here for us if we compare and bring up the individuality of our fellow animals and actually show them that in many ways they're not the same as us, and the ways they're different are extraordinary and exceptional and brilliant and amazing, but in the ways that matter they are the same as us, in that they have needs and desires and they feel joy and they want families, they want to have friendships, build communities, and they affect their cultures. They have cultures that the individuals affect, and I think that's something that has really kind of sunk into me much more recently. And I think that it's important to show that. And maybe in that way, we can make comparisons with humans, because we can show how we value our friends and our families and our, and we shouldn't be sold or bought or used or sexually assaulted. We shouldn't be forced to have babies in order that our babies are used. Those kind of things, I think, maybe are sometimes useful. in my opinion. I don't know, depending on the context. But going back to the language, I think with language, and again, I think it's not that we can say that words are bad in their own right or, you know, wrong to be used in and of themselves. But I think we ought to just be mindful of when we use language, the language that we are using has already got a culturally understood meaning. And as we live in a very speciesist society with the welfare paradigm coexisting quite happily within speciesism, we have to understand that, for example, when we talk about words like, I'm going to say the C word, the cruelty, abuse, and love, those words are culturally understood in a very different way to, I think, how we now understand them in the movement. So, you know, those words are already very familiar to people. They're already being used, especially by these big welfareist organizations like the RSPCA. They're always talking about being an animal lover and not abusing and trying to prevent cruelty. You know, cruelty is in the very title of RSPCA. And so those words already have that meaning for people. So people understand that. So when they hear those words, they have that, maybe that brain connection to how they understand it. I think what happens as advocates, we have now a different pair of spectacles on. We now see those words very differently. For us, all use is abuse. You know, use is cruel. Everything that we do, all violations are cruel, no matter how tame they might seem to someone else. They're all cruel. And love is a very subjective term, I guess, but you know, species is love, and I do really believe this. Species is in some way love. You know, farmers claim to love the cows that they're oppressing. People who have dogs living with them claim to love and probably do love their dogs, but that doesn't mean they're not in a relationship of dominance and control. That's a very different thing. And I think what happens with us is we have these different spectacles, and now we see love as meaning respect. I love you enough to love means I respect you. I don't commodify you. I don't use you. I don't oppress you. As different to the way speciesists understand love, and the same with abuse, you know, and the same with cruelty. So I think it's just being mindful of, we either have to take people on that journey. If we're going to use that language, we have to take them on the journey that we say, look, this is how you might understand cruelty, love, and abuse. This is how I understand it. Or we use different language, because I think there's a disconnect there in what we say, what we mean, and how they understand it. And so I think they think they're on the same page as us, and they agree. I've had so many conversations where people go, oh yes, I agree, I'm against animal cruelty. And I think, oh shit, that's not what I'm trying to say. So it's kind of, I've evolved my own language to kind of bring people away from that, take them on a journey, or frame it differently. And I think that's really important to bear in mind when we're having conversations or creating literature and campaigns and things like that. I don't know what Ayrton thinks about that. It'd be really interesting to get Ayrton's view on that.
Yeah, I think just firstly about the comparisons, I think you're right in what you just said. Like, it's really important to show people what the differences are, for example, between a human and a pig, also what those similarities are. Completely agree with that. I was more broadly speaking in terms of like specific oppressions that like groups of humans have gone through, for example. You know, like comparing what's happening to farmed animals to like slavery in America, for example. Like, that's the kind of area that I don't think really helps too much, because obviously there is that different language we can use. We can talk about each element that those animals are going through, without just using, I guess, those like triggering kind of words, really.
No, I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really like the word triggering, to be honest, either, but yeah, to what the rest of the point you was just saying, I think it's I mean, I completely agree with you. I think most people as you've just said, most people say they're against animal cruelty, and most people also say that they love animals. So therefore, that automatically should show us that they believe the words cruelty and love are very different to what we believe them to be. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the right or wrong answer is, to be honest. I guess that's why we're discussing it. But whether it's useful for us to be using different terminology, or whether we try to show people what love really means, for example, which that's probably the best word to use there, to show them what it really means, because showing what cruelty really means, obviously we're going to be showing them what they think, plus, the killing and the exploitation and that side of things. But if we take love as the example, if we show people that, not using animals and not exploiting animals and not breeding them against their will and not sending them in transport trailers to slaughterhouses, that is not how you show love. And especially that's not how you show love to, more vulnerable beings that unfortunately we have the power over. So yeah, I think there's definitely an option of us using different language in some senses, but I think, especially with terms like love, I think we need to push that, push the definition side a little bit more in terms of what it actually means to love somebody, which I guess we could bring in some human comparisons there, couldn't we, really? In terms of, you're saying you love pigs, but you're eating bacon. Well, you can't say that you love humans if you ate humans. That kind of comparison, I think that might be worthwhile. I don't know. It's all super interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. I suppose there I'd be more drawn to say something like using respect maybe rather than love, because actually we don't really have to love someone to respect them. And I think respecting someone's bodily autonomy and respecting their self-determination, acknowledging their self-determination, doesn't require us to love them as such. And I guess then it leaves us short if someone definitely doesn't love animals and goes, oh, I fucking hate animals. Oh shit, what do we do with that? So I suppose maybe I'd be more drawn to respect in that situation rather than just love.
I think the term respect is so important, and I think as well it's like really is vital rights-based language as well. Like we have a campaign in itself called Respect All Life. Like a lot of the like we've just been in Birmingham last weekend in collaboration with Speciesism, WTF, and like that's under our rights not welfare campaign.
I loved your banners at the march, because that's I bumped into you, didn't I, at the march, and I said, I really love your banners, rights not welfare. So it's
such a simple but strong message, isn't it? And respect all life is, again, simple but strong message. And I think using the term respect is so important, and like we try to do that as much as we can.
There's interesting research from Animal Think Tank. That's actually what I was going to mention. I said, I've forgotten what I was going to say. The Animal Think Tank, they've done some really good research into this, and particularly around using words that resonate with people and also words that throw up defences with people. And, one of the ones I remember clearly was, having conversations around a moral consideration is more acceptable, more likely to open up a door to a useful conversation than words like exploitation or speciesism. Part because people don't understand speciesism necessarily, and they find it a bit like, oh, is that calling me something? You're accusing me of something. And exploitation, definitely, I know I've used that word on the radio, and the shutters have gone up, definitely push back straight away. So the moral consideration is quite an open conversation. And indeed, just yesterday, Animal Think Tank's new research just come out, their new findings into narratives, very much showed that, averaging 45-50% of people researched are in favour of ending the use of animals, including meaning that they would have to give up using animals and stop eating eggs and dairy and such like. And that the key that they point in the receptive approach was to sort of talk about animals as individuals and individual stories. And something like S to the Wonder Pig, where the animal, one of Pat's farmed animal, really comes alive as a character and a person. This was shown to sort of break down barriers and get more empathy and support for ending the use of animals. So there's a really good. It's nice to see in the movement now that we have got some evidence-based stuff coming out, and it's not hard and fast. It doesn't mean we should sort of ignore this or do that or do the other. But it's just useful. It's guidance. It's good stuff to have in the locker to guide us. So, and what I would be interested in too, though, I mean, what we see, Wendy's mentioned the importance of language, and that's certainly one way that we can move beyond the welfare paradigm and start talking rights-based language, talk about individuals, respect, animals, and moving away from talking about cruelty and perhaps RSPCA language. I certainly agree with that. Well, no, not as a hard and fast rule. I think there's a place for cruelty and suffering and treatment. Absolutely, in our advocacy. We should be moving towards rights-based language. Is really important. Now, it's one thing for grassroots activists using this, but of course the nationals do have generally the budgets and the media reach to really have a far-reaching campaign, maybe with billboards or with a big social media campaign or media release and exposes in the papers. There's probably only one. There's a couple, I would say, at the moment. I mean, Animal Justice Project focus on both. You focus on the fundamental wrongs. You also focus on regulation and treatment in the campaigns. Animal Aid do the same. They've got, sometimes their campaigns are about sort of banning the whip, but they're under a bigger umbrella of banning the use of horses altogether. But they've had some recent campaigns that are addressing fundamental wrongs. And that's certainly something that Go Vegan World do. So they focus on the fundamental wrong, like, dairy takes babies from their mothers. That's a fact. That's a fundamental wrong. It's nothing to do with the regulation. It doesn't matter whether you've got the lowest welfare or the highest welfare farm or anywhere in between. It's the fundamental wrong. And Animal Aid recently have been running some similar campaigns, especially with dairy, pointing to the fundamental wrong and away from treatment. And I would say that that's a really useful and really essential part of how we're going to move beyond the welfare paradigm, is to have a lot more visual campaigning on the fundamental wrongs. Would you agree on that? Is that how do you feel about that as a campaigns manager of a national group? It's obviously got quite a say.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. I think we try to do that as well. Like within our campaigns, I think we obviously in national media, what we try to do is balance, because you've got to create an entire story as well that the public are gonna be able to receive well. So if it's relevant at the time to mention that this farm has broken 3 animal welfare pieces of legislation, but then what we can then do is couple that by saying, pieces of legislation which are there to aid in the use of animals and the farming and the killing of animals. For example, if they're breaking WATOC legislation, so that's welfare at the time of killing, so that's what slaughterhouses are following. If they're breaching that legislation, they are breaking the law, but that legislation is there to aid in the killing of animals, like it's literally in the name. So we do talk about legislation breaches in that sense. But yeah, I think that the fundamental side of things, like we definitely try and bring that through as much of our campaigning as possible. Saying that it's just, I guess, those like simple statements like you've already mentioned about, dairy takes babies from mothers and how that's wrong. We try and do that in everything. I'd say in most campaigns that we do, we try and bring in those kind of simple statements as well. I think it's really important. Obviously, it brings it back to the rights-based messaging. And also, if you keep them nice and simple like that and bring in if you bring in as well terms like mothers and babies, you know, we know that they're cows and calves, but mothers and babies, again, they're terms that the public hopefully will relate to a lot more as well, because as soon as they read the term mother, they'll instantly have, you know, recollection of their relationship with their mother or even their child. So I think, yeah, bringing those fundamental statements in, but also keeping them like as simple as possible, but then trying to use that language to make those associations, to make their kind of thought trail probably progress a bit further than it would do naturally. For example, if you was to use cows and calves. I hope that answered that.
Part of the problem is that you know, the media just love the horror stories, don't they? If you want to get a campaign,
Yeah.
it seems to be the well-trodden path is that you get a tip off, you know, that there's an abuse and conditions in a farm, and then you go and investigate it, and then you kind of blow it all up in the paper after months of really hard work. And let me say, brave, dedicated work. It's really hard work doing, you know, these kind of investigations. And then it does get a huge amount of media. It is a well-trodden path. And then on the back of that, and certainly firms like Viva really do this well. And then they get a load of vegan media, vegan packs, starter packs out on the back of a big campaign of an exposure of a you know. So there's a focus on a regulation and treatment, but then the solution is well, go vegan. Don't make a bigger crate or give another standard or drop them from the insured scheme. The answer is stop using them altogether. And I can see why campaign groups thrive on that, because the media just lap up those stories and have done for a long time. And I think it's probably the driving force. But I mean, Wendy, you sit and watch a lot of these campaigns. Do you think they could be improved? Do you think that's part of the solution if we're going to move beyond the welfare paradigm? Do you think that some of this lies in the hands of the nationals here?
I did, when you were talking about Go Vegan World, I mean, we've looked at a lot of their stuff on the Animal Rights Show, actually. And what's interesting is, and I think there's a couple of comments about it there as well, when we talk about the dairy industry takes calves from their mothers, every industry takes babies from their mothers, really. And that's probably a fundamental point we don't really talk about a lot in the movement, is that actually the one of the biggest fundamental wrongs is that we are bringing these people into being in the first place, and that involves, you know, sexually assaulting, often so-called forced breeding these individuals in order to bring more and more of them in order to be oppressed into the world. And we don't really talk a lot about that. We talk about the right to life, but we don't talk about the right not to be bred from so-called bread. Still looking at language on this, but you know, we don't really talk about that. So, and then also, does it mean that if people will then say, oh, but what if? And because I heard recently, actually, someone, I think that it was really strange. It was on the radio, and they were a vegan, and they'd become a so-called dairy farmer. They'd kind of gone in reverse, and but they then, did you hear this, Ayrton? Did you hear this one? And yes. Then this person was now keeping the calves with their mothers, because that was one of the big things that was, as a vegan, he was thinking, this is a really awful thing. We take these babies from their mothers. So as a vegan, now running a dairy so-called dairy farm, he was keeping the calves with their mums and saying, oh, but this is much better. This is a better way of doing it now. So it still kind of switches around and brings you back to the same place, in that, okay, but we're still oppressing the mom, and we're going to still keep oppressing the mom and other mothers, and we're going to keep using their bodies. So yeah, it's when you really look into a lot of this messaging, it can bring you back round to so-called welfarism and can we do it better? So it's very interesting. Sorry, I forgot your question. But yeah, no, I think obviously the people who have the power to get into the media, but then we were looking at the media the other day on the Animal Rights Show. I think if campaigns can get media coverage, but then even within media coverage, there's a lot of editing, there's a lot of language that gets changed, or there's a framing of it that still always seems to bring it round to treatment focused language or framing, welfareism, because that's how it's a default setting for people, isn't it? And especially in the media. So I think even with nationals getting into the media, it seems like the message just never seems to land. That's how I feel at the moment. Like, maybe Go Vegan World, I don't know, some of this, I don't even know what the reaction is to some of their messaging. It'd be really interesting to actually have research done into that. How do non-vegans see our messaging? What do they get from it? What do they see? What do they understand? Because that would be something that would really maybe give us pause for thought. Like, what do you I'm going to give you all this messaging here. What do you take from this? What do you think? Because I get most of them going to come out, oh, those animal rights people, they just want to stop animal cruelty. That's what the main message I think they would even have, no matter what you say at the moment, I think. So how do we break that? I wish I had the answer to that. I really do.
Big question. Look, we've only got a few minutes left. I did promise one question actually, so I'm going to just bang up Roger's question and get it there. Oh, there we go. So Roger's asked a question. So, do you think that recently confined language of being an animal lover is a step backwards? So I think this is referring to the recent campaigns. Viva have a "Are you an animal lover?" And it's based on the theory of tapping into shared values. Animal Rising did something last year based on the idea, well, look, most of us, whether we're vegan or not, see ourselves as animal lovers. So that's a shared value. So the idea is to tap into that. And then, well, if you are an animal lover, try and bring people along to stopping using animals by seeing that their values don't align with their lifestyle choices. And so the values that we share, we can then help people see how to align their lifestyle choices with those values. So that's the idea. That's the sort of theory behind the animal lover that cropped up last year and this year. Ayrton, you quickly got any views? Do you want to answer Roger's question there?
I think using the term animal lover is a kind of nice way to be able to, like, especially in the outreach sense, it's a nice way to be able to bring people over, because most people do believe they are animal lovers. So if you're questioning that, hopefully that's a way to start up the conversation, but then you can obviously direct it down the route of, what is an actual animal lover? And again, what we were saying earlier, what does the term love mean? So bringing the language back into it as well. So it might be a nice way to kind of bring people in initially, and a way that we can then educate them as well.
Yeah, it's kind of open, isn't it? Wendy, would you agree with that, or do you think Roger's maybe got a point that, well, it's nothing to do with animals, to do with not using animals, animal rights and fundamental rights and respect, not love, and therefore it creates a mixed messaging, and that people don't really understand what's what.
Yeah, I wouldn't tend to use animal lover in my conversations or campaigns. Generally, I would probably feel like I'd swerve away from that, just because I think, like, as we said, love is a very subjective term, and also it gives across. I also feel like, in a way, it does our fellow animals a disservice, in that I think, again, it's about the relationship we have with them. I think this paradigm of animal lover and animal, again, it puts them in this role. They have a role. They're here for us to fetishize, to think they're cute, to have as our pets, to have this very, and even if they're my babies, that, and all of that stuff, I think we need to be moving away from that. And I think if we're going to change our relationship and shift that relationship, I just think focusing on staying with the animal lover thing doesn't really move us away from that. And it also kind of perpetuates the misunderstanding, I think. For example, for people like dogs, often they're held in this esteem as like, oh, we love dogs, but we eat pigs. Like, let's compare them, as if that's, it makes dogs as if they're in this ideal situation, but they're not free. They're not liberated. They're oppressed. They're being violated. They're in a relationship of domination. And so we're holding up dogs on this high pedestal, as if like, oh, we should really love pigs the same as we love dogs, but actually doesn't change the relationship at all. And it doesn't even put forward the idea that we should be changing that relationship. So for me, I would be swerving away from that kind of messaging and focus more on, let's put forward like the individuality. Let's tell their stories. Let's bring their individuality as people into the light and show that they do have all of this exceptionality and their self-determination, their agency, and this, this desire to live and be joyful and to have their space and to not be violated and to not be controlled and not, and not to be at the whim of humans and not to be fetishized and not to be just your little cute pet. Yeah, let's move away from all of that, I think, as much as we can.
So,
I think you worded that really well, Wendy, just to add.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Surprised at this time of night.
I was just saying, I think Wendy worded that really well, and completely agree. Like, I wouldn't use, we don't tend to use the term like animal lover either, because like I do, not a personal fan of it either. But I think you kind of explained that exactly how I feel about it.
I tend to agree, but I do think there's a lot of value in those campaigns. I certainly think that the animal rights campaigns and Viva Current campaigns using that shared values is a really important theme. I think we should explore that further as a movement. But I think in general, Wendy, I agree with you. Ideally, we do need to move beyond. I think part of the problem is we are where we are. And a lot of people use this. It's like, oh, well, we have to be pragmatic and we're not going to go vegan overnight. And that's sometimes what people use to justify a welfare type kind of approach still. But there is a bit of both. We are in the real world. We do have to act. We have to win people over, and we know how hard that is. But once we've won people over, we have to make sure people stay that way, and then they have to hone and deepen their understanding. I do see it as a two-way step. People who haven't got over the making a scrambled coffee are less likely to be still kind of get to grasp with the subtleties of the language. But as a movement, we still need to be moving to that. Otherwise, we'll probably never get there. Yeah. Just to sum up then briefly, because it's been a really interesting conversation. I appreciate both of you and your input. And there's been some good comments on there too. It's obviously an area people are engaging with. I think this has been a good example of how we can have a good discussion on this with some good points, have some learning outcomes. But also to keep it real, we can talk about this, but we've actually got to do it. And it is kind of on our remit. And we're talking a lot about the next 5 years, trying to end the use of snares, some of the government legislation ban snares, ban puppy breeding, do away with phasing out animal testing, phasing out the badger cull and such like, shifts to plant-based food systems. But at the same time, it's sort of bereft of our movement. It's sort of on our movement and on ourselves to tackle this issue. Because it's the vegans and the animal rights advocates that can see the issue. And it's there for us. It's got to try and shift this. So just to sum up, and Wendy, I'm going to ask Ayrton first of all, a couple of summarise to say where do we want to, what should we be doing as a movement? What are our priorities to tackle this problem? Where's a blueprint, a bit of guidance for people listening, and maybe people shaping their campaigns? What would your experience say?
Firstly, that's a very big question, I would say.
I think we need another hour for that one, Tim.
Yeah. I think what we've been saying throughout really is if there's activists out there and you want to create a campaign, it's incredibly important to start off with that rights-based messaging. I think a second quick point to add on to that is not to complicate it, keep it as simple as possible, because as we've already said, the term speciesism, the public don't understand what that is just yet. We all know because we're in this movement, but the random person down the street won't know what that term is. And there's a whole plethora of terms, for example. So keep your messaging rights-based and keep it simple, just so that anybody reading it will hopefully understand, and we can hopefully bring them in, as soon as we possibly can.
and Tamina. Are you waiting for me now?
Brilliant.
Oh,
Thanks.
hey,
And you'll be part of our panel.
another person. So
Apologies for the
part of our panel at the big.
I shut Brian out tonight because on the Animal Rights Show on Monday.
Wendy, your last little.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying I shut Brian out because he was terrorized. He literally terrorized me on Monday during the Animal Rights Show. It was literally clawing. So
yeah, you're sorry. You will just have to put it with Molly being in the call. She's on every single call. I'm sure people don't mind.
I'm sure no one would mind Molly being on the call. Hey, Molly.
No, she's got the best face. Look. Oh.
I love cats. They're brilliant. Yeah, for me, I suppose if I think of it more on a how do we move forward as individuals, I guess because I'm looking more at my own life and my change in life now, taking care of Dylan, and I don't get out as much to do all these big campaigns and stuff. But obviously, looking at kind of grassroots outreach, or even in our own lives, I guess it's looking at how we can more embody strong values of making our own relationships more just and respectful for our fellow animals. Like, how do we do that on a daily basis with our own language that we use to ourselves, with others, just in daily conversations even, because I think we can create a ripple effect. We can use our language as transbreaker for people to like go, oh, what did you just say? And then we can explain why we say that word, things like that. So we can use language especially to almost like micro activism on a daily basis in our daily lives, but also of course in our outreach, to really think about what are we really saying. It's not to say that this word is bad or this word is the best. It's like, what are we really trying to say to this person, and can we encourage them to see the relationships that we already have with our fellow animals, and how they're so skewed, and how they're very oppressive, and we're very dominant, and these are not healthful, respectful relationships. Can we get them to see this? Does our language help them to see this? But also embodying our values in our daily behavior, so that we are building, like, I guess, stepping stones, building blocks every day to create the vegan world we want to see. Like, looking at how maybe can we create a vegan world? What are we doing? What are we saying? How are we living? How are we relating to the fellow animals around us, even in our own gardens, our own communities? What are we doing for them? How are we relating to them? How are we speaking about them? Just things like that we can do every day. So I know Ayrton's talking on like a more national campaign level, so I just wanted to bring it into an individual. What we can do as individuals is actually very powerful and not to be underestimated.
Yes.
Thank you, Wendy. And that does just sum up that what part of this conference is to bring together the nationals and the grassroots. This panel is a really good example of it. Got some really strong representations. I'm really grateful for all the individuals who are stepping up. Vegan Park Conference is now only 10 days away. It's getting close. In fact, 9 days away. Getting excited. You can come along if you're listening and you're with us. You can still come along, get tickets in advance or any £10. Come along and join us. So thank you very much, both. There's a conversation on going in the comments. It's really useful. I think people have found this a useful conversation. I certainly have. I really find it useful to listen to different perspectives. You know, I know that we're all united in wanting to do the best we can for animals. And the conversations like this can only help. So thanks for that. It's a good conversation. Thank you, people, for listening. And we will leave it there. That's the last of our 4 episodes. And hopefully see somebody at the Vegan Park Conference. Thanks.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you both there. And thank you for having me on, Tim. I really appreciate it. And good to see you both.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Nice to be on with you, Wendy.
Thanks, Ayrton. Thanks, folks.